on the ground in Afghanistan for weeks. And there's a picture of them on horseback. We have had modest numbers of U.S. military forces on the ground in Afghanistan for weeks. And there's a picture of them on horseback.
The courage of the first into battle is what guarantees the courage of those that follow.
Imagine you are a soldier in the U.S. Army Special Forces, also known as the Green Berets. You are trained in unconventional warfare and working with foreign allies. You are sent to Afghanistan shortly after the 9/11 attacks to fight against the Taliban, the extremist group that harbors Al-Qaeda, the terrorist organization that was behind the attacks. But there is a catch. You have to ride on horses, because that is the only way to move across the rugged and mountainous terrain of the country. You have to face thousands of enemy fighters, who have tanks, rockets, and guns. You have to work with a local warlord, who is unpredictable and ruthless. You have to risk your life and your sanity, for a mission that seems impossible. How would you do it? How did they do it? This is the story of the 12 horse soldiers, the first American troops to enter Afghanistan after September 11th. In this episode of the InfoRaiser Show, we will tell you how a small team of brave and skilled warriors defeated a larger and stronger enemy, with the help of some loyal and brave allies, and some old and faithful horses. Stay tuned. They were not your typical soldiers, though. They had to ride on horses, like some medieval knights, and fight against the Taliban, who had tanks, rockets, and guns. Sounds crazy, right? Well, let's find out how they did it. The 12 horse soldiers were part of a team called ODA 595 or Task Force Dagger. They were U.S. Army Special Forces, also known as Green Berets, who were trained in unconventional warfare and working with foreign allies. They were sent to Afghanistan in October 2001, just a month after the 9/11 attacks, to help the CIA and the Northern Alliance, a group of anti-Taliban fighters, to overthrow the Taliban regime. Their mission was to capture the city of Mazar-i-Sharif, which was a strategic and symbolic target for the Taliban. But there was a problem. The terrain in Afghanistan was very rugged and mountainous, and there were no roads or airstrips for them to land. So, they had to fly in by helicopter and parachute into a remote area, where they met their local allies. The allies were led by a warlord named Abdul Rashid Dostum, who was a fierce and charismatic leader, but also a bit unpredictable and ruthless. He had a history of switching sides and fighting against his former allies, so the Americans had to be careful not to offend him or his men. Dostum welcomed the Americans and gave them some horses to ride. The horses were not the best ones, though. They were small, skinny, and old, and they had no saddles or stirrups. The Americans had never ridden horses before, and they had to carry their heavy weapons and equipment on their backs. They looked like a bunch of cowboys in a bad Western movie. But they had no choice. They had to ride on horses, because that was the only way to move across the mountains and valleys, and to blend in with the locals. The Americans and their allies faced many challenges and dangers along the way. They had to deal with the harsh weather, the lack of food and water, the cultural differences, and the constant threat of ambushes and attacks from the Taliban. The Taliban had thousands of fighters, who were armed with tanks, rockets, mortars, and machine guns. They also had the support of Al-Qaeda, the terrorist group that was behind the 9/11 attacks. The Taliban knew that the Americans were coming, and they were ready to fight them. The Americans and their allies had to use their skills and tactics to overcome the enemy. They used their radios and GPS devices to call in airstrikes from the U.S. Air Force, which bombed the Taliban positions and vehicles. They also used their snipers and marksmen to take out the enemy leaders and gunners. They fought bravely and fiercely, and they managed to break through the Taliban lines and reach the outskirts of Mazar-i-Sharif. The final battle for the city was on November 9, 2001. The Americans and their allies launched a massive assault on the city, which was defended by thousands of Taliban fighters. The battle was intense and chaotic, and the Americans had to fight their way through the streets and buildings, while dodging bullets and rockets. They also had to watch out for suicide bombers and booby traps, which the Taliban had planted everywhere. The Americans and their allies suffered some casualties, but they did not give up. They fought with courage and determination, and they finally reached the center of the city, where they raised the American flag and the Northern Alliance flag, signaling their victory. The capture of Mazar-i-Sharif was a huge success for the Americans and their allies. It was the first major city to fall to the anti-Taliban forces, and it opened the way for the liberation of the rest of the country. It also boosted the morale and confidence of the Afghan people, who had suffered under the brutal rule of the Taliban for years. The 12 horse soldiers had accomplished their mission, and they had made history. They had shown the world that a small team of brave and skilled warriors could defeat a larger and stronger enemy, with the help of some loyal and brave allies, and some old and faithful horses. The story of the 12 horse soldiers is based on a true story, which was written in a book by Doug Stanton called Horse Soldiers. It was also made into a movie called 12 Strong, starring Chris Hemsworth. The movie is a bit dramatized and fictionalized, but it still captures the spirit and the essence of the story. The 12 horse soldiers are heroes, who deserve our respect and admiration. They are also an inspiration, who remind us that nothing is impossible if we have the courage, the skill, and the will to do it. That's it for today's episode. I hope you learned something new. If you did, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to hit the bell icon to get notified of our next video. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.